Welcome to the final bell. Two of Britain's most iconic and ferocious fighters, Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn, rivals, legends, and two men who divided a generation of boxing fans. We're counting down both of their top 5 wins, but the real question is, who ranks higher? You decide. Chris Eubank Sr. was never just a fighter, he was a phenomenon. Flamboyant, fearless, and utterly uncompromising, Eubank didn't just win fights, he commanded attention. From brutal domestic wars to world title nights under the brightest lights, he built his legacy against the very best of a golden era. In this video, we count down the top 5 wins of Chris Eubank Sr., the victories that defined his reign, silenced doubters, and cemented him as one of the most unforgettable champions British boxing has ever produced. Expect drama, rivalry, resilience, and moments that still echo through boxing history. Let's rewind the clock and relive the nights simply the best proved exactly who he was. Number 5. Tony Thornton. 19 September 1992. Chris Eubank's 4th defense of the WBO super middleweight title wasn't about flash. It was about control, durability, and championship composure. Fighting in front of a packed crowd at the Scottish Exhibition Centre in Glasgow, Eubank faced a man known for toughness alone, Tony the punching postman Thornton, a respected contender who had never been stopped and came in riding a 9-fight winning streak. Eubank started like a champion should. Sharp, spiteful combinations and fast hands allowed him to dominate the opening rounds, picking Thornton apart with clean punches and movement. By the 4th, it looked routine, but Thornton refused to play the role of opponent. In the middle rounds, the American began to apply pressure. In the 7th, he landed a solid right hand that briefly stunned Eubank and reminded everyone this was no formality. Eubank managed the fight smartly from there, controlling rounds 9 and 10, weathering a late rally in the 11th, and boxing safely in the 12th, knowing the belts were staying with him. After 12 hard rounds, the judges scored it 117 to 112, 116 to 113, and 115 to 113, all for Eubank. The win extended his unbeaten record to 33-0, preserved his world title, and showcased a side of Chris Eubank Sr. that often goes overlooked: the ability to dig deep, adapt under pressure, and win when the fight turns uncomfortable. Number 4. Tulani Sugar Boy Malinga, 1st February 1992. If number 5 showed Chris Eubank's control, this fight showed something just as important: his ability to survive and adapt. Making the first defense of his WBO super middleweight title, Eubank stepped into the ring at Birmingham to face one of the most underestimated operators of the era, Tulani Sugar Boy Malinga. Smooth, intelligent, and defensively brilliant, Malinga was never an easy night for anyone, and Eubank found that out quickly. From the opening rounds, Malinga's sharp counterpunching and evasive movement disrupted Eubank's rhythm. Where many opponents froze under Eubank's presence, Malinga stayed calm, picking his shots and refusing to be drawn into reckless exchanges. It was awkward, technical, and uncomfortable, exactly the kind of fight champions are judged by. The pivotal moment came in the 5th round. Eubank caught Malinga and sent him to the canvas, a knockdown that would prove crucial on the scorecards. But rather than folding, Malinga showed tremendous resolve, rising to continue pressing the champion and forcing Eubank to work every second of the remaining rounds. Despite the knockdown, the fight stayed razor close. Malinga continued to land clean counters and frustrate Eubank with his ring IQ, pushing the champion deep into championship rounds. It was a chess match wrapped in a title fight, tense, physical, and fiercely competitive. After 12 hard rounds, Eubank retained his belt by split decision, underlining just how narrow the margins were. In hindsight, this bout has aged brilliantly. Malinga would later defeat Nigel Benn in their rematch, and go on to test fighters like Roy Jones Jr., confirming the level of opponent Eubank had overcome. This wasn't a statement win, it was something more revealing. A champion digging in, finding a way, and proving he belonged at the very top. Number 3. Michael Watson vs. Chris Eubank 1. 22nd June 1991. Some fights define legacies not because they are comfortable, but because they are unavoidable. This was one of those nights. On 22nd June 1991, at a packed Earl's Court in London, Chris Eubank and Michael Watson collided in a high-stakes, 12-round war for the WBO middleweight title. Inside an arena holding 11,000 fans, two of Britain's finest produced a contest so fierce, so evenly balanced, that it demanded to be seen again, for better or worse. From the opening bell, this was elite domestic boxing at its absolute peak. Watson, disciplined and powerful, pressed forward with intent, while Eubank relied on sharp counters, movement, and his trademark composure under pressure. Neither man was willing to yield an inch. Every round felt contested, every exchange mattered. The action was relentless. Watson's strength and precision repeatedly troubled Eubank, forcing him into uncomfortable exchanges, while Eubank's timing and accuracy kept him competitive when momentum threatened to swing away. It was tactical, physical, and emotionally charged, the kind of fight that keeps a crowd on edge from start to finish. After 12 exhausting rounds, the judges returned a majority decision in Eubank's favor, 116 to 113, 115 to 113, and 114 to 114. The verdict immediately split opinion. Many ringside observers and fans felt the fight was too close to call, and controversy followed almost instantly. The calls for a rematch were loud, emotional, and unavoidable. Not out of rivalry hype, but because the fight demanded resolution. This first encounter wasn't just a title defense or a hard-fought win. It was the spark that ignited one of the most significant and tragic chapters in British boxing history. At the time, though, it stood as proof of something crucial. Chris Eubank could survive elite pressure, thrive in chaos, and win when the margins were razor thin. A classic, a controversy, and a fight that boxing would never forget. Number 2. Nigel Benn, 18th November, 1990. WBO Middleweight Championship. On November 18th, 1990, British boxing witnessed one of its most savage and iconic nights, as Chris Eubank Sr. challenged Nigel Benn for the WBO Middleweight Championship in Birmingham. What followed was a brutal, chaotic war that didn't just crown a world champion. It ignited one of the greatest rivalries in boxing history. The fight began without feeling out jabs or caution. From the opening bell, Benn stalked forward with raw aggression, while Eubank stood his ground, confident and defiant. In the fourth round, Benn landed a ferocious right uppercut during a break, causing Eubank to bite through his tongue. Blood poured into Eubank's mouth, but he hid the injury from his corner, fearing a doctor's stoppage. By the fifth round, Benn's left eye had swollen almost completely shut, yet neither man backed off. The sixth and seventh rounds saw Eubank begin to apply sustained pressure, forcing Benn onto the ropes with sharp combinations, while Benn responded with punishing body shots and looping hooks. The pivotal moment came in the eighth round, when Benn landed a heavy overhand right on the top of Eubank's head, sending him to the canvas. It was the only official knockdown of the fight. Eubank rose quickly, composed himself, and finished the round strongly, even posing between rounds as if to signal that he was far from beaten. In the ninth, the fight reached its boiling point. Benn pressed forward looking for the finish, but Eubank suddenly exploded with a left-right combination that rocked Benn backward. A straight right sent Benn stumbling into the corner, and with just seconds remaining in the round, referee Richard Steele stepped in to stop the fight. Chris Eubank Sr. was crowned WBO Middleweight Champion of the World, handing Nigel Benn his first professional defeat and beginning a rivalry that would define an era, one that would later echo through the next generation with their sons. This was not just a win, it was the birth of British boxing folklore. Number 1. Michael Watson, 2. 21st September 1991. WBO Super Middleweight Championship. Number 1 is the most difficult win of Chris Eubank Sr.'s career to revisit, not because of what it gave him, but because of what it took from everyone involved. The rematch with Michael Watson took place on September 21st, 1991, at White Hart Lane. Unlike their first fight, this was not a close contest. Watson boxed superbly, controlling the range, landing cleaner shots, and steadily building a clear lead on all three scorecards. By the later rounds, Eubank was visibly tiring and increasingly aware that he was falling behind. Knowing he could not win on points, Eubank was forced into desperation mode. In the 10th round, he applied sustained pressure for the first time in the fight, but Watson absorbed it and continued to dictate the tempo. Near the end of the 11th round, Watson landed a short right hand that sent Eubank to the canvas. The referee did not administer a mandatory count. As Eubank rose and the fight continued, he immediately threw a right uppercut that caught Watson flush, sending him crashing backward into the ropes for a knockdown. The bell sounded moments later, Watson rose but was clearly unsteady as he was guided back to his corner. The 60-second break told two very different stories. Eubank knew he needed a knockout to save his unbeaten record. Watson, ahead on every scorecard, only needed to survive the final round. Yet he appeared concussed and in no condition to continue. Despite this, he was sent out for the 12th. Early in the round, Eubank unleashed a sustained barrage. The referee stopped the contest, awarding Eubank a technical knockout. Moments later, Michael Watson collapsed in the ring. Due to the lack of a specialist brain unit at the first hospital and critical delays in treatment, Watson suffered severe oxygen deprivation, leading to permanent brain damage. The tragedy of that night led directly to major reforms in boxing safety, including mandatory ringside doctors, paramedics, and improved emergency response protocols. Watson's courage did not end there. Through extraordinary determination, he relearned how to walk and completed the London Marathon in 2003, walking it over 6 days to raise money for the Brain and Spine Foundation, crossing the finish line alongside Chris Eubank and his neurosurgeon, Peter Hamlin. What is often overlooked is the lasting impact this fight had on Eubank himself. He didn't just beat his opponents, he destroyed them. Nigel Benn, the Dark Destroyer, a man who walked into the ring not looking for a fight, but looking for a finish. Pound for pound, there are very few fighters in boxing history who carried the kind of raw, savage power that Benn brought every single night. But which wins defined him? Which performances made even the hardest men in the sport stop and stare? Today, we're counting down the top 5 greatest wins of Nigel Benn's career. The knockouts, the wars, the moments that cemented his legacy as one of Britain's most ferocious fighters of all time. Trust me, you do not want to miss number 1. Let's get into it. Number 5. 3rd October 1992. Nigel Benn versus Mauro Galvano. And this one was about so much more than just a win. This was Nigel Benn becoming a 2-weight world champion, on foreign soil, in front of a hostile crowd, in the heart of Italy. Benn was challenging for the WBC super middleweight title, and from the first bell, he made his intentions absolutely clear. No feeling out process, no tactical patience. He went straight for Galvano, banging hooks to the body, cutting off the ring, and forcing the champion onto the back foot immediately. Galvano tried everything to survive. He held, he hit on the brake, he did whatever he could to slow Benn down, but Benn wasn't in the mood. Blood appeared on Galvano's eyebrow in the second round, and from that moment, you could feel it was only a matter of time. Then came the moment that nearly derailed the whole night. Galvano bundled Benn through the ropes in the third. The crowd erupted, but referee Joe Cortez waved it off. No knockdown. And Benn came back even angrier. By the end of the third, Galvano's cut was so severe he couldn't come off his stool for round 4. The fight was stopped. Benn was world champion. But then, chaos. The Italian crowd and officials tried to strip the title from him on a technicality. Wild scenes. Benn and his camp going crazy. Eventually, sanity prevailed, and the belt stayed where it belonged, around the waist of the Dark Destroyer. Winning a world title in enemy territory, becoming a 2-weight champion, and nearly having it snatched away. Number 4. 23rd May 1992. Nigel Benn versus Tulani Sugarboy Malinga. And this one is fascinating, because this wasn't just a win. This was a warning sign that Benn almost missed entirely. Malinga was a seriously underrated fighter. Slick, smart, a brilliant counterpuncher with a sharp jab, and the kind of awkward style that gave big punchers nightmares. And on this night, at the National Indoor Arena in Birmingham, he gave Benn absolute hell. From the opening bell, Malinga wasn't intimidated. He used his jab beautifully, moved well, and landed heavy right hands that genuinely rocked Benn at points during the fight. Many ringside observers felt Malinga was doing enough to take the decision. Even Malinga himself was convinced he'd done enough. After the final bell, he said, "I won the fight, definitely. I couldn't believe it when they said I lost." And honestly, he had a point. The fight was tight, razor thin. Referee Paul Thomas scored it 98 to 97.5 in Benn's favor, one of the smallest margins you'll ever see in professional boxing. Benn knew he'd been in a scrap. Afterwards, he admitted he'd taken Malinga too lightly, said it was back to the drawing board, and even called for a rematch in South Africa. That rematch did eventually happen, in 1996, and Malinga got his revenge, winning by split decision and taking the WBC title from him in one of boxing's great upsets. But here in 1992, Ben scraped through. And the reason this makes the top 5 is because of who Malinga was, a future world champion, a man who arguably edged the fight, and Ben still found a way to get his hand raised. Sometimes the closest wins tell you more about a fighter's heart than the easy nights ever could. Number 3, 29th April 1990, Nigel Benn versus Doug DeWitt for the WBO middleweight title in Atlantic City, away from home, in enemy territory, against a battle-hardened champion. And this is the night Nigel Benn became a world champion for the very first time. The context matters here. Ben was coming off the only loss of his career, stopped by Michael Watson in 6 rounds the previous year. The critics had questions. Did he have a chin? Did he have the stamina? Could he handle adversity at world level? DeWitt was confident. He was the champion, he was experienced, and he promised the younger, less seasoned Ben would be found out. And early on, it looked like he might be right. DeWitt put Ben down in the second round with a left hand, and for a moment, every doubt about Nigel Benn came flooding back. But here's what separated Ben from ordinary fighters. He got up, he reset, and then he went to work. DeWitt had a famous chin, an anvil, they called it, and he needed every bit of it as Ben began unloading left hooks to the head, round after round, wearing the champion down. By the 8th, DeWitt was marked up, exhausted, and running on empty. Ben unleashed hell. A left hook dropped DeWitt along the ropes. A right uppercut put him down again. Then a chopping right followed by 2 big lefts sent him crashing to the canvas for the 3rd time. 3 knockdowns. Fight stopped. 44 seconds into the 8th round. Nigel Benn was a world champion. Britain's first middleweight world champion in a decade. Away from home. After being knocked down. After being written off. And if you needed any more proof of how much he'd put into that performance, he'd broken his hand on DeWitt's head during the fight. Didn't matter. Nothing was stopping him that night. Number 2, August 18th, 1990. Nigel Benn versus Iran Barkley for the WBO middleweight title. And if you want to understand what made Nigel Benn so terrifying in his prime, this is the fight you show people. Barkley was no pushover. This was a man who had stopped Thomas Hearns in 3 rounds. A brutal, dangerous puncher who had shared the ring with Roberto Duran and Michael Nunn. He came into this fight looking to get back on track, and he had the power to hurt anyone on the planet. But Ben didn't care. The opening bell rang, and within 20 seconds, Barkley was on the canvas. 20 seconds. Ben came out like a man possessed, unloaded a combination that stunned Barkley instantly, and followed it up with a left hook that put him down before the crowd had even settled into their seats. Barkley got up, because that's what Barkley did. But Ben kept coming, wave after wave of power shots, relentless pressure, that trademark dark destroyer intensity that made it almost impossible to think clearly, let alone fight back. Barkley did manage to hurt Ben at one point, catching him on the ropes and making him wobble. And for a brief moment, you wondered if the momentum might shift. But Ben weathered it, reset, and went back to work. Down went Barkley for the 2nd time, then the 3rd. 3 knockdowns, the 3 knockdown rule in effect, and referee Carlos Padilla had seen enough. Fight over. Ben wins by TKO. The atmosphere was electric. 2 elite middleweights, both with something to prove, and Ben had just dismantled one of the most dangerous men in the division in under a round. This wasn't just a defense of his WBO title. It was a statement, a coming-of-age moment, a reminder to the entire middleweight division that Nigel Benn was on a completely different level when that switch flicked on. Number 1, 25th February 1995. Nigel Benn versus Gerald McClellan. And if you only ever watch one Nigel Benn fight in your life, this is the one. This is the fight that defines everything he was as a warrior. But before we get into it, it's important to acknowledge what happened after the final bell. Gerald McClellan suffered catastrophic brain damage that night. He is blind, has severe hearing and memory problems, and has lived with the consequences of this fight every single day since. This was boxing at its most brutal, and that context should never be forgotten. McClellan came in as a heavy favorite, and why wouldn't he be? His previous 3 fights had all ended in knockout victories. He was widely considered one of the most dangerous punchers on the planet. Ben, the WBC super middleweight champion, was expected by many to be just another name on McClellan's highlight reel. Within 35 seconds of the opening bell, it looked exactly like that was going to happen. McClellan hit Benn so hard, he knocked him clean out of the ring. Inside the first minute. Most fighters don't come back from that. Most fighters don't have to. But Benn hauled himself back in, beat the count, and refused to buckle. What followed over the next 9 rounds was one of the most savage, breathtaking, heartbreaking exchanges in the history of professional boxing. Back and forth. Both men taking and giving punishment that would have stopped ordinary fighters in their tracks. McClellan knocked Benn down again in the 8th. Benn came back. By the 9th, an accidental headbutt appeared to significantly affect McClellan, though nobody knew the full extent of what was happening inside his head at that point. Then came the 10th round. McClellan had never fought past the 8th round in his entire career, and it showed. Benn landed a right hand that dropped McClellan to one knee. He got up at 7. The fight continued, then another right hand, and McClellan went down to one knee again. This time, he didn't beat the count. Fight over. Benn wins by 10th round knockout, but the celebrations were short-lived. McClellan walked back to his corner, collapsed, and told his trainer he felt like there was water running inside his head. He was rushed to the Royal London Hospital, underwent emergency brain surgery, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Benn himself collapsed from exhaustion in his dressing room that same night. Before he was released the following morning, he went and shook McClellan's hand and apologized. That moment says everything about the respect these two men had for each other. This fight is number 1, not just because of the drama, the knockdowns, the sheer refusal of Nigel Benn to stay beaten, but because of what it cost both men. Benn dug deeper than most human beings ever will, against one of the most dangerous fighters of his generation, and came out on the other side a champion. This was Nigel Benn at his absolute peak. This was the Dark Destroyer at his finest. And this will never be forgotten.